Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the final day of daily briefings for COP27 and our own Campus Climate Corps briefings on the events happening and taking place in Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt. As always, I'm your host, Rock Aboujaoude Jr. Welcome to the program. You know, I'd like to say that COP27 is done, but I can't say that COP27 is done because the negotiations are still going on. We noticed that last night the EU proposed that the carbon market, which would be a massive, massive boost for climate discussions taking place outside of COP27, be endorsed by COP27. COP27 failed to make action on that particular proposal. Also, we noticed that the EU has decided that they want to get more involved in COP27 and COP28 as they proceed next year, sticking with the idea that a carbon market would truly be beneficial for the world for climate talks outside of these COP27 or COP20 or actual COPs at all. We also noticed that one of the final drafts, the second final draft, was released about 15 to 20 minutes ago now, which essentially proposes that that developing nations receive financial aid, which is exactly the statement that we all walked into COP27 thinking that we were going to solve. So we're glad that we're making some or no progress at all. Anyway, I do have some content for each of you today. And as always, there is a live Campus Climate Corps volunteer monitoring our live daily briefings. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them, any comments, questions, or concerns. But for now, we're going to provide you with a little bit of content that we've recorded and then dive into a roundtable discussion by our Campus Climate Corps folks on what happened at COP27 and maybe what to expect moving into next year's COP28. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over real quick to Dr. Capece, who actually heard a talk by Al Gore. Every single year, Al Gore gives a very fine presentation, very powerful presentation on what to expect for the coming years and how to motivate and continue action. So John, tell us about Al Gore's presentation this year.
Well, he released a press release and made some statements, particularly talking about a new product or a relatively new product. I think it's been recently updated and extended, that is on his webpage called Carbon Tracker. And I believe the specific product, the new product, is called Carbon Trace. And he talked about how it was integrating artificial intelligence with the information from a large number of organizations. I think he said 9 different nonprofit organizations are cooperating with him to bring in data from satellites around the world to sort of pinpoint the sources of carbon and try to identify them location by location. In other words, trying to break the problem up by nation, region, locality, and specific sites as far as sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And this webpage, Carbon Tracker, provides some information about it, and then it goes into the maps, and it's a global map, but then you can, of course, zoom in, and you see these various size circles representing emission sources, the large ones being fossil fuel extraction points and facilities around the world. And it also allows you to look at specific either carbon dioxide or methane, and I think even nitrous oxide perhaps. And then you zoom in to the various locations. Here we are in the United States, and then down here in Florida, place near and dear to our hearts. And then as we zoom in near Gainesville, you can see a source to the south of Gainesville. And this is an example of what information is provided. And it shows a cement plant and the annual emissions for that facility. So it's an interesting tool that allows people to see perhaps some of the major sources of greenhouse gas emissions in their local area. So that's an interesting sort of spin on the issue to try and empower people maybe towards local action.
Excellent. Thank you so much, as always, John, for that wonderful presentation. Really interesting stuff, of course. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michael. I hear you may have some final photos to make me jealous, in addition to the ones I keep getting over WhatsApp, of all you guys smiling together with the COP27 backdrop. So what kind of content do you have today? I heard it was kind of a lame duck day kind of over at COP27 as the negotiators are locked behind back doors. But what kind of pictures do you have for us?
Well, I have several pictures for you. I am streaming from the media center and at COP. As usually, it's freezing here. And if you don't believe me, just look at the gentleman just behind me. He's in a winter jacket and he has a hat on. He has a hat, so he's even more frozen than me. So I'll make it real quick today. Let me share my screen, and we'll go to the photos right here. So this would be the first image of the day. It was my first impression of COP today. Things are getting dismantled. COP is ending. Some of the pavilions were completely empty. Some of them had the caution tape or do not enter barrier, so people could not get in. So that was the sign. Another empty pavilion. This is the United Arab Emirates pavilion. This one was usually empty, but today it was completely empty. Here we have another pavilion where it shows that they are getting ready to dismantle it again. In the Indonesian pavilion, they already moved with the dismantling, so it was kind of falling apart already. I spent the morning there with John when we were walking around, and there was not much happening. It almost sounded from John, hey, we might want to go home because there is nothing happening here. But then we walked to the Japanese pavilion. We stopped here by this booth, and within 5 seconds, there was one of the scientists or the engineers. He approached us and starting to explain why he's there, what they are presenting. So the Japanese simply didn't any take day off like the others. They are there and they have a program till 7 p.m. today. So it's not a day off for them. Another scientist took notes of what was being discussed with John. Then he also approached me, saw that I have the press badge. So he wrote down my credentials so he can check online what are the, if there any of the images will show on the Florida, within the Florida media group. John didn't waste any time. He discussed with some of the Japanese engineers and scientists the stuff there. I moved around and had a look in some of the pavilions which were not closed. So in this one, Mediterranean pavilion, there was a small presentation going on, but there were 3 panelists and exactly 1 person in the audience. Then I went to another pavilion where something was going on, and the topic was, where do we go from here? So we are heading to COP28. It was not much, not interesting at all. Therefore, I just took a few more images around the pavilions, and that's the image which shows my today's impression of the pavilions. Then I moved to the plenaries, and it was a completely different story. It was busy as never. There were many people trying to enter the plenaries. Of course, I tried my luck as well. But as you can see on this image, it was open, but except for media. So I could not get in. And when some other people make, like Jeff and John, make fun of me, saying that I take them to the press rooms where they cannot enter because they have just the observer badge. Now it was the opposite. I could not get in, and they could get in easily. So here's an image of a journalist being stranded just in front of the plenaries, not being allowed to get in. On the other hand, at least I got a chance to go to one of the press conferences, and on the right-hand side, there is the special representative of the COP27 president. And I think his face says it all. That's what he was when he was being asked, what will be accomplished? What can you tell us that was accomplished? Is there any future that this COP will be successful? His face simply says it all. So as I was leaving the area of plenaries, I came over this small protest, but it was really silent. Mostly young people were putting their banners up, and they were just standing next to them, taking some photos, doing some small interviews, but it was all very, very silent. Here are some of the slogans that were shown on the banners. And last image from this protest section is, it was all under very detailed eye of the security, and as well as the UN security, as well as the local security. So things don't get out of hand during the last day. I was also approached today several times by young people. They were asking me if I could take photos of them so they have a nice souvenir. So I took several images like this today. And I also decided to take images of our team. So this image shows John, and that's about the amount of space he gives me for taking his photos. That's exactly the amount of space I get. Because if he is not discussing it with some of the other scientists, he just sits in the IT room and works on his computer. So it's hard to get his attention. So I begged him, and eventually we got a shot like that. But it was a lot of effort. Now, taking images of Esteban, it's a completely different story. Esteban is a pleasure to work with. I ask him, please stand here, he stands there. Please smile this way, he does. I ask him, can you give me the Obama face? He gives me the Obama face. So Esteban, thank you. It was great taking photos of you. Yeah, I can see that I can see Valholly right now. So this is the story of Valholly. The stage is full, we wait there 20 minutes. Finally, it gets empty, and Valholly gives me a face like that. So I have to beg her, please give me a serious face. And no. It took a lot of effort. I have about 57 images of Valholly before I got this one, which I am finally fairly happy with. Just look in the left bottom corner. So either somebody removed the letter from the word Sharm, or it just fell apart. So now it has Sharm El Sheikh. I might need to fix it if we are going to use it for something official. But Valholly, sorry, that's the best photo of you I have. We had a great, another great member in our team. It's Jeff. He just came here for week 2. And again, it's a pleasure to work with him because he's got a very special gift. He attracts other people. We were standing there somewhere in one of the pavilions, and suddenly 2 of the Egyptian kids just came by and asked if they can have photos together with him. Yes, no problem. The booth was closed, but Jeff asked, can we have free coffee? Of course, no problem. We took the images, so we got free coffee. And meanwhile, he was approached by yet another lady, and I don't know what they talked about. I don't want to know. But in Egypt, nothing is for free. So I had to take images of all the Egyptian kids who were serving the coffee there. And final member of the team, that would be me. Yes, I am in this image. I'm not on the right-hand side. I'm the one in the left-hand side. You can see me right there because John asked me to take images of myself photographing others. So I did that. I showed him this photo. He was not happy with it. So we agreed that he was going to take images of me today himself. So I gave him my phone. And these are the images I got from him today. He took about 30 images like that. And then finally realized, yeah, maybe it's worth to point at me. So after all, I got an image like that. So we have a good image of me. The final image for the day is this one. And I think it might be the symbol photo of this year's COP. If you compare the people on the left-hand side and the gentleman on the right-hand side, I think it tells the story of this year COP. But I don't want to end on a sort of this sad or negative note. So this is really the last image from this COP. This is our group. I think it was great. working with this team, and it was really an enjoyable experience. And with this being said, I'm turning it back to you, Rock.
You know, Michael, it's not too late to take a picture of me too here. That way you get.
I was thinking what to do with you. I didn't want to show the images from last year and the year before. So come back next year, come with us, and I'll take plenty of images of you. No problem whatsoever.
I'll plan
on it. I can do a screen capture.
Yeah, screenshot and just Photoshop me somewhere in there.
There you go.
All right, so now we'll continue on with our next branch of the segment, which is Solutions Day, which Dr. Capece has a little bit of a segment for us there. I believe Solutions Day was indeed yesterday. So now we'll take just a little bit of a look into maybe what solutions are being proposed at COP27.
We're approaching the end of COP27, and today was Solutions Day. And the COP27 president issued a statement today emphasizing the need for the delegates to achieve some of the goals that they had set for this COP. And this is a fairly typical event. They never achieve all their goals, and often they have to extend the stay of the delegates by a day or two. So often the conference will extend into the weekend. But in an effort to motivate the delegates to achieve their goals, the COP president issued a statement today in which he talked about, he made statements such as mitigation work program is yet to reach the desired outcome. Adaptation is still held back by procedural matters. Ambitious outcomes on finance have not yet materialized. And then he went into the loss and damage. Loss and damage parties are shying away from taking decisions. And he invited the Secretary General to join the group and for the final days of COP. And he had a discussion with him about loss and damage. And loss and damage has been a topic of this conference from the beginning, and it's clearly an important item as it approaches the end. And it's much like show us the money. The developing nations are telling the developed nations to begin providing, in effect, reparations for climate damage. And this is a touchy topic. Developed nations like the United States are shying away from making any money. But I think that the obvious solution to this is to establish a percentage of national investments in climate solutions should go to loss and damage. And that needs to be managed carefully such that nations that are simply following the same mistaken course that developed nations did as far as reliance upon fossil fuels are incentivized to divert from that strategy and using the loss and damage payments as a way of achieving that objective. But I today visited some of the smaller exhibits. I mentioned before that I thought there were 35 of these smaller booths in addition to the 147 pavilions, but in fact there are 50 of these. So given that each exhibitor has only a week, that means 100 additional exhibitors through these smaller booths. So I visited a couple of them today. One of them was managed by various U.S. universities and the student groups within them. So that was interesting and enjoyable to talk with them. And this included Michigan Tech University, Colorado State, University of Connecticut, Colorado State, Emory, and Vanderbilt, as well as the University of California system. Then I went over to the University of Berlin and spoke with a researcher there who was working on agroecology, agricultural systems combined with biodiversity. And he was focusing on the Amazonia region where Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia come together. And his work focused on documenting the benefits of the tropical forests as far as the sink for carbon dioxide, and documenting how, when it's converted to traditional agriculture, often these lands are cleared for pasture, how a lot of the carbon that is stored in the soil and the canopy is lost and very difficult to recover. So this is happening throughout Amazonia, and it's a serious issue. Also visited with some Indian representatives who have a program there sponsored by UNESCO, and it addresses education. They've developed virtual education tools on the climate issue. Then a fellow from Jordan who's working on environmental issues there. Great pleasure to talk with them. Then I went over to the US Center, and they had a series of panel discussions, some of which were interesting, some of which seemed a little forced, but they began with a lead by example session where state and local government folks were discussing their various programs. And these included a Department of Interior, Assistant Secretary for Water and Science, and then representative from Minnesota talked about weatherization programs, New Mexico talked about well plugging, and California spoke about electrifying the ports. So these were all government officials, mayors, cabinet officers for the state. Very interesting panel. After that, there was a panel on net zero government, the goal to achieve by 2050 national governments having net zero emissions. Now, this was sponsored by the USA, and the objective set by the Americans was to achieve 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And they were talking about one of their primary goals is light duty vehicles, converting those over within the government fleet entirely to electric by 2027. The Netherlands talked about purchasing power and how national governments, by decarbonizing their own operations, can drive products and services within the nation through their purchasing power. Ireland talked about a carbon tax and other programs that they had going. Similarly, Germany discussed their programs, and France pointed out that they were able to achieve 10% reduction in only 2 years simply by doing the basics as far as energy conservation. And Australia said that they'd established going to decarbonize their government by 2030, and they were in Australia, homes already are 33% solar. The panel, a second panel with Singapore, Japan, and Canada, basically went through the same process, discussing some of their electrification and vehicles. And Canada seemed to be quite a long way ahead. Japan as well. Japan basically said, USA, you're kind of late to the game. We had a plan for decarbonizing our government back in 2002, and we are well on our way. So these were some of the sessions. And at the end, they had one session that seemed a little contrived about climate smart networks, basically business integration. So they gave several businesses an opportunity to talk about their efforts and how they were decarbonized. So on this last day of one of the last days of COP27, there were some interesting discussions to be had in the American Center, and it will remain to be seen how much progress the delegates actually make towards their goal, particularly on the mitigation front. However, they do seem to be particularly focused on loss and damage, and we'll see how that ends up in the next day or so.
And I think we're seeing how that's ending up in real time with not much progress being made. But that being said, I think that provides a wonderful segue into perhaps a discussion between the attendees of Campus Climate Corps to COP27. This is technically on paper the last day that COP27 will take place. Most likely, depending on what comes out of the negotiation rooms right now, it is getting towards the evening time in Egypt right now, and there is, as of yet, no final draft. They have a second final draft, which should tell you all you need to know about how those negotiations are taking place. So we expect probably COP to move into the next week, but each of the Campus Climate Corps members present today have attended COP27, attended some of the press briefings, some of the interesting selections of technology on display at this event. So we're going to go one by one between each of us and discuss What have we seen at COP27? What have we learned? What are our hopes and possibly some predictions for COP28? Going by the old motto that he just last shall be first, Jeff, I'd like to call on you first. You attended COP27 completely in week 2. So I'd be curious to see your first impressions and last impressions based upon your attendance this year. What do you think about COP27? What are your hopes perhaps for COP28 given what you've seen so far in this past week?
Well, I have to say I learned a lot. It definitely was very different than my expectations. And I spent a lot of time, including today, the last day, testing the Greta Thunberg hypothesis that this is all a waste of time and a greenwashing event. And so the last time we talked, I had discussed the amount of attendance by actual party representatives, the representatives of the countries, and what they were here doing, mostly presenting trade innovations. And so I really wanted to today kind of get a better handle of what the observers were all about. And so I went to the plenaries, and like Michal was saying, the plenaries were much more crowded today. Although I did witness several people snoring completely asleep in these plenaries because like the one I attended was a plenary on Article 26, which is the carbon market article of COP. And there was a lot of time, apparently more time spent the last few days, but even today, a lot of time was spent on, arguing over the wording of certain sentences or certain paragraphs. And they, as Rock has noted, still haven't been able to come up with any kind of final consensus on any of these documents. And there's a lot of really nitpicky discussion going on, and I could see why people were sleeping. And then when I left, though, I ran into an observer from South Africa who has been attending since 2003, every COP since 2003. And we began discussing really the roles of the observer. And one of the roles is what we're doing ourselves today, which is disseminating the information that's contained at these conferences to the general public, and instilling interest and discussions on what is going on. Another role is we can actually send comments to the negotiators, but that's a very extensive process. Just that process, I noticed, was a word that was used a lot today because everybody's talking about the process. That has to be gone through in these painstaking negotiations, and so that's a big long process too for observer groups to get comments to the negotiators. We have to go through our participant groups, and it funnels up the chain, and so and I wonder if it's even looked at by the time it gets there. And then another way is by setting agenda meetings with the negotiators, and I think that's a great effort, and I hope that Campus Climate Corps eventually gets to talk about one of our favorite agenda items, which is having universities and higher education throughout the world put a lot more focus on the climate. And then lastly, each organization can have its own pavilion or its own little kiosk, and I also hope that we also end up getting to do that. And anybody listening, we're looking for funding to do those kind of things. And then I ran into the Minister of Climate from Croatia and had a really wonderful discussion with her. And one of the points that she wanted me to take away as the Minister of Climate herself is that it's kind of silly to even have a Minister of Climate, because climate and the climate issues that we are facing plays across every governmental agency as well as every university discipline. And she says that, you know, her colleagues and her prime minister kind of say, oh, okay, well, you're doing your climate thing. Good, go over there and do your climate thing. And one of the things that she is having a hard time is changing the idea of that, hey, I'm not doing the climate thing. The climate thing is going on and we all need to be focusing on it. And I think that's a really good takeaway for Campus Climate Corps as well, is that every single college discipline has a crucial role to play in the solution. And that includes the fine arts even. It obviously includes my example of archivists and librarians. That's one of the big takeaways I came away from here. And so then to go back to the Greta Thunberg issue, I do agree with Greta, actually, that she made a great splash and made a big difference, but maybe now is the time for her to step away. And I'm not even sure if protesting at these COP events is really the right thing either. I saw some protests going on, and there were some Brazilian students mocking the protesters. What do you want? Climate change. When do you want it? Now. And if we're going to be protesting things, we really should be protesting things like the oil and gas summit that's coming here next week. And we should be protesting on our own campuses and shutting down our administrations until they begin focusing on climate in all of academia.
Absolutely. And I think a very strong take on what we're proposing at the university system, or within the university system. Speaking of those within the university system, I'd like to turn it over to Valholly. You are the youngest amongst all of us, and also one of the ones who's actually attended a COP in the past as well. Not only that, but you are of Indigenous community yourself and probably have seen and was able to identify, or maybe not able to identify, with a lot of the concepts and themes playing out at COP27. So let me ask you the same thing I asked Jeff. You've attended now for 2 weeks. You've seen plenty of sessions, heard plenty of speeches, many of them long and boring, I assume. But I'd like to ask you now about your personal thoughts regarding COP27. You also attended the one in Madrid. So I'm very curious about your thoughts and analyses now on your experiences both in Madrid and then comparing them now to COP27, and then maybe some ideas about what should happen at COP28 in Dubai next year.
Yeah, it's definitely really conflicting, especially like when you take into account all the different intersections of my identity. Like being a young and Indigenous person, those two groups are very radical at COP. They're radical, but they don't get much done. But also, of course, being surrounded by all these older men who are very knowledgeable in their fields, and they all have the very set idea of the future and what's happening, and just really intense, not entirely cynicism, but just like there's no time for all of the frills that can come with protesting and activism, and no time for the small demands sometimes. So it's weird. And also, of course, with my years of work, I don't have a lot of hope the way that I see a lot of young people do. So it was really hard to find common ground with anybody at this negotiation, compared to COP25 in Madrid and COI. Well, COI this year was a lot more disappointing than the COI in Madrid. In Madrid, I was actually lucky enough to meet up with one of my friends there, and she went to a few discussions, and she was so well spoken that she was asked to moderate a panel at COP25. And that was a great opportunity for her. She did so well. But nothing major like that happened this year, not that I saw. Honestly, I am excited to see which final draft comes out, and see what actually
gets done this year, because there were so many different asks from everywhere. And that was one thing I talked about with Kathy Castor. When I wasn't actually interviewing her, she asked me to sit down for dinner with her, and I was asking her, after sitting down with her for about 10 minutes, there were like 3 different people who came up to her to tell her goodbye, to give her gifts, to say, this is the issue that you need to be focusing on now. This is what needs the attention. And everyone had something different to say. And it was weird. And I asked her, like, what's it like having to hear from so many different people all the time that this is the important issue and this is the one you have to focus on? Like, how do you manage it? And she didn't really have a good answer for me. So I guess you never really figure that out. And it's weird to have to find priorities when all of these issues are important. And to have to put some above the others is really depressing, but sadly, that's something that has to be done. And there are just so many things going on. And of course, I'm still in my activist spaces and Indigenous and youth spaces online. So I'm hearing about all of these other terrible things that are happening, not just at COP. And it's been overwhelming as always, but it's just the work that's done. And the protests were lacking. They weren't, like Jeff was saying, a lot of them were just really surface level. Like, it was basically a good show of what COI was, all of those small protests. And it's not like the protests really get much done, except for the one thing that a lot of people can attest to: it allows you to connect with others. And it's good for networking if that's what you're into. And I did make some good connections here. And I did find out about a lot of cool initiatives, the ICJ resolution, and I was able to connect with an old lawyer of mine from the Reynolds v. Florida case. And I asked her about a few of the different lawsuits that are happening and a few of the different issues that have been brought up. And she had a lot of great things to say. So that was a big hope that somebody who didn't even come this year, she is still in the States and she's still fighting for what she believes in. She's doing it in such an inspiring way. She's just an amazing person. Andrea Rogers. I not sure if she will see any of these, but if she does, thank you for all the work that you have been doing and you will do. And yeah, like Jeff keeps saying with Greta Thunberg, the greenwashing is intense, and the oil company presence and the fossil fuel presence in general, it's depressing. It's sad to see it, especially taking into account one of the big lawsuits happening in the States right now, Holland v. Brackeen, relating to ICWA and that federal law. It's just a good reminder of like who's in control basically and how the money will always run everything. So hopefully there's going to be significant action one day, but we haven't really seen it yet.
Absolutely. I also like to point out a couple of things you said. One was the idea of no protests. And even in the USA, where news is frequent about COP27, there was almost no coverage of international protests, despite the fact that there were marches on both Fridays, both the one that began COP and then one that ended COP as well today. The news has been almost silent on international marches and international protests, very unlike what happened in Madrid and in Glasgow. So despite the fact that the media is not covering does not mean there isn't a protest happening near you right now. So look it up, protest near me, type in your zip code, get out there and protest. Thank you so much, Valholly. Now we're going to shift it over to Michael. Now, Michael, I already know you gave a presentation today, and you're out there with your camera, you're out there taking pictures, getting the, when people come up to you and they ask you for a picture or two, you're so nice in taking the pictures from them. But you come from Czechia, which is one of the countries which is we're going to experience frequent droughts, frequent flooding issues in the upcoming years. I am curious about maybe your participation in COP besides the cameraman. So maybe talk a little bit about, if you can, the idea of what you're thinking of, in addition to how good of a camera shot you can get. What is your reactions as somebody who is a citizen of Czechia right now, given how COP27 and the previous COPs have gone through?
Let me take it from a slightly different angle. I send some of the images I take here to my friends back in the Czech Republic, and I ask them, so what do you read in the news in the Czech Republic? What do you see in TV about COP? And it is kind of sad, but the major question I got was, the reports say that the food is not good there at COP, that there are huge queues and you don't get good food. I couldn't believe that that was the main topic on the news. So I went and checked the Czech news, and it takes a lot of effort to find there something meaningful about COP at all. Every 3-4 days, there is one small article about it, and there is a nice image that's taken from AP or Reuters, but that's about it. So the coverage is really small. So I was thinking about maybe sending some of my images back to some of the Czech agencies, Czech news agencies, and then when I saw the amount of coverage there, I decided it's absolutely not worth it. Although I saw some of the Czech people here within the EU pavilion, the discussion there were, what do you want here? You're not official. Why you bother us? Just sit here, look, and then just leave. So my take on that is that's my take on this.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks, Michael. Now we're going to shift it over to Esteban. Esteban, you are a first-year Campus Climate Corps attendee. So maybe I'd like your first impressions about COP in general. You've attended both weeks. You've seen many presentations. You've done many interviews. You've met many people. So you might, more than some of the other folks on this call, might have had some more personal interactions with some of the people behind the camera, behind the interviews, some of the folks you may have talked to post-presentations who denied you interviews, and the ones who've given you the interviews as well. So I'd like to get your personal analysis on COP27 in general, and maybe where you think we're headed for COP28, given this is your first year attending.
Yeah, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for first and foremost, thanks for Campus Climate Corps for having me here reporting. It's been a great opportunity. So yes, indeed, the interviews allow you a glimpse into, and especially the conversation off the record, that allow you a glimpse on the objectives and the agenda of each and every one of the actors you're interviewing. Some are pretty fixed on their agenda. Some are taking a look at the broader picture. That's probably the focus that it's best to have. That's if all the actors within COP were taking a look at the broader picture, COP would be a very different thing. Having said that, also trying to continue with Jeff's analysis of what's actually COP. Is it a greenwashing event? Yes, it is a greenwashing event up to a great extent. And in particular, given the urgency of the problem, the fact that it was in a country where protests couldn't happen, and that the next year is in a petro state, well, it's particularly concerning. At this point, if we don't happen to have any meaningful results from this COP, I think that every actor within COP has to seriously consider this is greenwashing, and perhaps by attending, we are being functional to what governments and other interest groups want us to do, which is essentially to attend COP, be relatively entertained with the whole set of events happening there, and not be disruptive. Essentially keeping us and also the audience of the world at large under the idea that something is being done. Perhaps if the results of these negotiations are very small or null, we should seriously consider a shadow COP, another COP that is actually serious and that in which there is more access to express your opinion if you come from an NGO, and it's a more inviting COP in that sense, and where perhaps some bilateral agreements can happen with governments or particular entities that do take this seriously. And perhaps the existence of a shadow COP could perhaps prompt more action from the other side. On the other hand, regarding the protests, yes, we all know that it was difficult to protest here, and one of the big highlights of my COP experience was the interview with Farouk from Pakistan. I was after the story that confirmed that protesting in Egypt was difficult, and he's essentially putting himself in a lot of danger by protesting and by saying that it's difficult. It took us a while to get to that point, and it was definitely one of the highlights. What I would like to add is that perhaps we need to rethink protests. Perhaps protests need to happen even more inside. Perhaps they need to happen in the actual petrostate pavilions. Perhaps we are not being symbolically disruptive enough. Perhaps we need to take the protest a little bit closer to the meeting rooms. Perhaps in the sense that it would carry more pressure, it would carry more disruptiveness in also a symbolic way, that we know actually who is stalling the process and that we're protesting right at their door. That's perhaps another lesson learned from this COP. Overall, there are also a lot of actors that don't mind the greenwashing, or that might be all in with the effect that COP generates in them, which is essentially being entertained, acquiring prestige because of coming here, because of being part of it. And the other highlight is that, as John often says, there are solutions, and those solutions sometimes have not reached the upper table. And it is left to some particular entities and civil society at large to work something out of those solutions and to network, and in that sense, COP becomes more useful. In the darker prognostication of what would happen, in my opinion, is that thus far, governments have not felt enough pressure in the ballot box, and the lobbying pressure is still high enough for them to do very little. In this dark prognostication, it could happen that at some point, yes, climate change continues to exert more dangers on our society, continues to affect our food security and generate extreme weather events, and eventually there is enough pressure on governments to do something, and actually there we see very fast action. The unfortunate thing about that is that by that time, a lot of people may have lost their lives, may have lost their livelihoods. So that's a darker version of what could happen. But again, we need to think outside the box. We need to start seriously considering if by being part of COP or not being disruptive enough, we are being very functional to interest groups that are particularly fixed in stalling the process. It's a very dark, overall, a very dark analysis, but yeah, we're trying to keep it honest. However, the positive thing is that solutions are there. In the darker situation, it could happen that actually climate change continues eventually to exert more pressure and more extreme weather events, and perhaps not even that puts pressure in the ballot box, because as we've seen with COVID-19, humanity has a never-ending ability to ignore what's happening and to think that something else is responsible, or that something does not exist. In that sense, yeah, it's part. I guess it's part of our wiring, and we have an ability to rely on thinking alternative realities just to avoid things that are not how to say it, comfortable, that are not convenient. But that's the darker version. On the other hand, this is not a virus, and this is very visible. Extreme weather events are visible, and that may actually exert eventually enough pressure in the ballot box. The other point, and this is something I read today being reported, I think it was the new president-elect of Brazil, Lula da Silva, that actually said that it is, at this point, given the gravity of the crisis, it is inconceivable that the UN cannot actually exert more pressure and do more because of its own limitations. And he scheduled a special meeting. I believe that was reported just today. The UN is it's a body that carries essentially an original sin. It has the problem of the Security Council. It has a crisis of legitimacy. The fact that in the Security Council, the winners of World War II have veto power. Well, it creates at least from a third world perspective, a lack of legitimacy. And at the same time, the UN, besides that, this is not necessarily a matter for the particular Security Council, has other limitations. We have a global problem, and the UN cannot actually exert too much pressure on anyone because of its own design. It's evident that we need, this is all to say that it's evident that we need new institutional frameworks for our new problems. 21st century frameworks for 21st century problems.
Absolutely. Which I think provides an excellent segue into perhaps the last analysis we'll have today by Dr. Capece. John, you have a unique vantage point of having the command of the science enough to call out the BS and also where to identify solutions where they exist. So regardless of the constraints of the Security Council, regardless of the constraints of how NDCs are set up, you as a scientist understand where we can go with what limitations we have, even if there is red tape that exists. So having attended a few COPs before, and with command of the science behind you, what is your analysis on COP27, and maybe what kind of a future do you think you can paint for us about how COP28 can and should play out?
Well, I heard a lot of great things here at COP27. You know, a lot of nations are doing terrific things, just very innovative things they hadn't done before, all terrific steps in addressing the climate crisis. But I think this would have been great if it had been at COP2, not at COP27. You know, this has been a problem festering for decades. You know, we knew about it in the 80s. By the early 90s, we should have been, you know, fully engaged. And here we are at COP27, finally getting down to taking some concrete actions at the national and international level. And a perfect example was Japan, and I mentioned that in my segment earlier about decarbonizing government and how the USA was touting, oh, we're going to decarbonize by 2050, and everybody needs to have a plan by COP28. And Japan, it was like, we had a plan in 2002. Where have you been? And that kind of puts it into perspective. We have some very serious limitations in the United States due to political intractability. And we're not over it. We're moving into another cycle where Congress is unlikely to be able to accomplish much of anything in the next 2 years. And it's just extremely unfortunate. Not that they haven't accomplished some things in recent years, but not enough. And not enough is going to be done in the coming couple of years to really address the issue. And whereas, coming here to COP is an experience, getting to COP is an experience. Being in these different cities, I don't travel much internationally. And these COP trips are actually my only international travel that I do. But going to Paris, going to Madrid, coming here, going through Istanbul, these, and I'm sure Cairo, where many of you have been, these cities of 20 million people, all consuming, all wanting more. There is no expectation on my part that these folks are going to slow down, limit their consumerism, and help reduce the carbon emissions. I just do not see that happening. That's why I seldom go to any of the plenary sessions. They're just too slow in the discussions, and I'm not sure that they're going to achieve the solutions. They convene people together who might generate solutions, but the actual negotiations are not going to be the solutions. They will be essential, and they will probably follow the larger society trends. But I think that if we're going to tackle this climate crisis, it's going to have to be through some extremely innovative steps on renewable energies and driving the prices, the cost of renewable energies down into the dirt where fossil fuels simply cannot compete any longer. And that needs to be the investment priority of all nations, and the investment of people's time, the talents of young people. When I see, Rock and Valholly and Esteban and in the introduction video, there's that one image of the students, I think it was from Belgium or someplace, and she's carrying the sign that says, study hard, protest harder. That really needs to be the mantra of today's university students. They need to buckle down and come up with solutions and demand that these solutions be implemented rapidly and pervasively throughout the world and all of its economies. We're here in Sharm El Sheikh, and we're at the venue, and Michael's taking photos, and these jets keep roaring past us. We're on the landing approach to this airport where thousands and thousands of tourists are coming and going and going and coming, and we are the feature event right now. But tomorrow it's going to be back to hotels and beach and diving and recreation. I hear there's a beach here. I've seen it off in the distance, but haven't really had the pleasure of actually touching any water yet. But yeah, we've got to address this energy issue in a very aggressive fashion. And I talked to a lot of great people here at this conference. You can have just wonderful conversations with incredible people doing amazing things. And some of them are here with us. We've got a great team, a terrific team here with us. And it's a young crowd here at COP27. Jeff and I, whereas back in Florida, we're just kind of average. Here, we are the old folks. And it's terrific to see a young crowd, an energetic crowd, because they're going to have to, get this thing moving and get it across the finish line. So this isn't over yet. Tomorrow there's more negotiations, and they say that our badges will allow us in, and we'll try to get in and monitor the progress. But it's been terrific being here in Sharm El Sheikh with this team, and you, Rock, there back in Florida. And there's just so much more work for us to do in the next year before COP28. We have great ambitions to help share this with many more university students across the USA and hopefully in other countries as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. And that's a great way to segment the idea that if you want to see Campus Climate Corps at your university, get into contact with us. If you're not in a university system and you want to support us, please get a hold of us. Donations are always appreciated. But that being said, if we do have some more content, you'll receive it via email, links to daily briefings in the future covering the remaining negotiations. I can definitely say that it has been an absolute pleasure to work with everybody on this Campus Climate Corps team. I think we've done an excellent job this year. I'm going to hopefully be bringing you some even greater content and better content next year. But as Dr. Capece is mentioning, if there is something you want to do in the immediate future, look up a climate protest near you. If there's not one happening near you, start one. Especially if you're a young university student within your campus, there's always students ready, willing, and able to start and join a protest. So get a hold of them, get a hold of anybody you can, start something, get it in your school papers, make everybody know, get it known that you are out there protesting for your future, because there is no greater climate defender than yourself fighting for you. Anyway, thank you so much for attending our daily briefings this year and 2022 Campus Climate Corps Daily Briefing Conferences, and we look forward to having you all next year. Signing off from Gainesville, Florida, this is your host, Rock Aboujaoude Jr., and we'll see you all in the next one.
Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.